So the Age of Aquarius starts about now and continues until about 4000 AD. And as it's the Zodiac Age, defined in astronomy as the time when the position of the sun at the March equinox is in Aquarius. Now, talking about the Age of Aquarius is a way to open up a broad conversation about our planetary future, reflecting on the changes in ideas and culture that are needed to build a shared moral vision, aiming to integrate scientific knowledge with respect for spiritual wisdom. The astrological concept of a Zodiac Age is provocative, it's controversial in view of the tensions between astrology and science and religion. Astrology is quite notorious for rather wild and baseless claims and speculation. As a result, it suffers from cultural exclusion. Now, I would like to frame this discussion in a primarily scientific way, aiming to integrate scientific knowledge with spiritual and social interpretation of the Age of Aquarius. I'll explain how this holistic integral analysis reflects an underlying meaning within Christianity and how it relates to climate change. The aim is to contribute to a rigorous analysis of the millennial evolution of human culture. Excuse me. Now, my view is that understanding the meaning of the Age of Aquarius can support a systematic scientific philosophy to point a path toward paradigm shifts in science, in religion, and in politics. Considering the Age of Aquarius in practical terms, the ancient Romans called their water engineers Aquarians. And with global warming as a primary planetary emergency, the Aquarian profession will be central to the Age of Aquarius, managing the world oceans and water systems through innovative technology is a critical and urgent priority to restore a stable planetary climate and repair the damage that our profligate economy has inflicted on our ecosystems. My view is that in this century, we'll see farms and cities and transport systems built on the world ocean, achieving a vast scale that we can't now imagine, transforming our relationship to the planet. The guiding positive philosophy will be to integrate care for humanity with care for nature, supporting economic abundance, human dignity, climate stability, and natural biodiversity. Now, could these dreams of a new age have a coherent basis? To just start to put such new ideas into a systematic framework, I want to now explain the orbital basis of Zodiac Ages in the phenomenon known as precession of the equinoxes. The equinoxes are the dates each year when the sun moves across the equator. And we can see it in this diagram with the equator, the path of the sun, and the sun showing the position. Now, what we can see here is that the position of the equinox is towards the end of the constellation of Pisces, and over the next century or so, this X point will move into the constellation of Aquarius, as I will explain. So, on the 21st of March, which is the date shown here, the March equinox, the sun moves into the northern hemisphere. On the 21st of September, it moves into the southern hemisphere. And the March equinox is defined as the starting point of the natural year for both astronomy and for astrology. So what exactly is a Zodiac Age? Now, the visible effects of this astronomy are fairly simple to understand, but they do require that we raise our gaze to see the big picture of planetary time. Zodiac ages are defined by the changing stars at the March equinox, They were first observed by ancient astronomers who measured the slow shift of the stars against the seasons. There are no records, no direct records of the Zodiac Age concept surviving from ancient sources. But a forensic study of the ancient data shows that this knowledge was clearly present, clearly important, and especially in the Bible. Precession is known as the third cyclic motion of the Earth. The first motion is the day, as our planet spins on its axis. The second motion is the year, as we orbit the sun. Precession is the third motion. It's caused by a slow wobbling of the Earth's axis. It takes a period of nearly 26,000 years. Now we'll move on to the next slide, please, Jeff. Here we see this model of the axis of the Earth wobbling, and like a spinning top, taking 26,000 years. And it completes the description of the structure of time for our planet that we can observe by naked eye astronomy. Now, more modern astronomy has found a few other things, but it's the day, the year, the great year of precession are the three that could be detected in ancient times. And Sir Isaac Newton put this onto a rigorous basis by proving that the wobble of the Earth's axis is caused by the gravitational tug from the sun and the moon on Earth's equator. The oldest surviving accurate measurement of the speed of precession was by a Greek astronomer called Hipparchus in the 2nd century before Christ. Hipparchus appears to have made his calculation from observation of a total lunar eclipse, a blood moon, which happened on the 21st of March at the equinox in 135 BC. He compared what he saw in the sky to then ancient Babylonian star map, and he found that the position of the moon at the equinox showed exactly where the equinox point was, but the stars were different from the earlier star map. So he could tell, and he could calculate just how fast it had moved, and he did that very accurately. And but he was the first to prove it that survived as an accurate calculation. But earlier societies also knew about precession, possibly for thousands of years. Problem is it's so slow. So with one complete rotation of the equinox around the zodiac takes 25,771 years. This motion provides the structure of our planetary system of time, and it's been stable for billions of years. But it's so slow, just moving 1 degree in a human lifetime, 71.6 years, that it's not generally understood in the broader community. But over the millennia, this stellar shift had major effects on practical concerns of ancient communities. They observed the rising and setting dates of stars to know when to sow and harvest their crops and when to hold religious festivals. For example, the Jewish historian Josephus said that the festival of Passover was always held when the sun was in the constellation of Aries. That had been true since the time of Moses, but by the time of Christ, around when Josephus was writing, the Passover sun had shifted into a different constellation, into Pisces. Similarly, there was a Greek poet, Hesiod. He observed the Pleiades, we know them as the jewel box. And he said, when the Pleiades are setting at dusk, that's the time to plough the fields. And that was true in Hesiod's time, about 750 BC. But by now, the time of the Pleiades setting has changed by about 6 weeks. So ancient societies built their temples to align directly to different stars. But what they found was that every few centuries, the precession would have moved the star so that the temple alignment no longer worked. And what they did in Egypt, many places in Egypt, they demolished their temple and rebuilt it by shifting the axis so that it would point to the stars. And they did it 4 or 5 times over 1,000 years. looking at stars like the temple pointed to the rising point of a bright star like Sirius. And these examples show how important this shift of the celestial sphere was for ancient astronomers. And precession also had a deeper, unseen effect on the climate. And in any case, its place in culture is strongly disputed. So looking to how we can integrate this scientific understanding of the Zodiac Age with its influence on culture and religion, the question is how we can develop a resulting cosmology of the new age, helping to place human identity in a systematic universal framework. The problem with this idea of an integrated understanding is that the Zodiac Age concept is so closely associated with astrology, so it's broadly ignored and rejected in both scientific and religious circles. The Age of Aquarius is generally understood in terms of the popular New Age culture, and it's seen as a magical fantasy which lacks any rigorous scientific meaning. Mainstream science and religion both regard the astrology that's associated with Zodiac Ages as acceptable. The magical, fatalistic forms of thought in astrology are seen as incompatible with the scientific understanding of material causality and also with Christian ideas of freedom and God. So there's a basic intellectual challenge to justify the Zodiac Age concept as anything more than either merely descriptive astronomy or poetic mythology. Over the last century, astronomy has dramatically expanded our knowledge of the size, the nature, and the age of the universe. It's led to the view that human life is insignificant against the awesome scale of the cosmos. Now, bringing this back to the Age of Aquarius, the problem is that the cosmology of the Big Bang is so incredibly vast in time and space that it has no implications for human life. There's no point of direct connection or meaning for us. Whereas, by contrast, the cosmology of Zodiac Ages sees human connection and meaning as central. At the scale of human history, this millennial cosmology of precession of the equinox provides a fully encompassing story. It's a cosmic clock that measures the whole of human time. It's an order of magnitude that stands in between the centuries in which history is usually discussed and the billions of years analysed by astronomy. So even so, astronomy at that big scale is fundamental to systematic thinking about reality as an accurate and objective description of the known universe. But if we ask how humans connect to the universe, that big picture of modern cosmology only provides quite limited information. And the sense of humanity as part of the cosmos has to begin with what we could call a terrestrial cosmology, focused on how the Earth connects to the solar system. That means looking at the stable repeating patterns that provide the complex context for the evolution of life on our planet. It's a cyclic order which involves this millennial concept of precession. And it's a way of thinking that strongly relates to astrological concepts with its cyclic focus. Now, Carl Jung is an important guide to such New Age thinking about our connection to the cosmos. Jung is known as the father of the New Age, and his approach to psychology integrates this mystical spirituality of the New Age with scientific analysis. His pioneering analysis of spiritual symbolism of precession appears in essays such as Aeon, where he connected the symbolism of the age of Pisces, now ending, with Christianity. And he presented an imaginative vision of how the astrological symbolism of Aquarius can provide a hopeful framework for our planetary future. Jung's analysis of themes such as symbolic archetypes, psychological repression, the collective unconscious, and synchronicity are all of great value in putting the Zodiac Age concept into a coherent scientific context. Jung presented the optimistic idea that the Age of Aquarius will be a time when new knowledge will combine with the recovery of lost traditions to transform human awareness, establishing a path towards psychological wholeness and what he called a coherent understanding of divinity. My view is that Jung's perspective on these matters provides a way to reconcile faith and reason, establishing a vision of the new age that coheres directly with the ancient wisdom teachings that inspired the Christian Gospels. A main problem with religion and spirituality from the scientific perspective arises from the spiritual focus on how we connect to reality, which tends to produce speculative, subjective perspectives that are grounded more in our emotional feelings than in objective evidence. Whereas if religion seeks to be real, rather than just a sort of comforting fantasy, it needs to be compatible with scientific knowledge about the orderly structure of nature developed in modern cosmology. That's quite a difficult challenge in view of the centrality of miraculous and supernatural claims in religion. Major religious ideas about creation and salvation are not supported by empirical evidence. Jung sought to find meaning in religious beliefs as symbolic allegory. He read texts as parables for a scientific understanding. As a result, he called on theology to acquire more humility in the face of scientific knowledge, to escape what he called the repressive amnesia involved in conventional faith, which is the apologetic tendency to deliberately forget disagreeable memories. That means we need to question the dubious and unscientific claims about the origins of Christianity and instead treat the gospel stories as moral parables with an enduring ethical meaning, rather than in the traditional way as evidence of supernatural intervention in the world. Now, the precession hypothesis that I'm presenting may be regarded by some as dubious. And next slide, please. Yet, I suggest it has the advantage of being totally compatible with modern scientific knowledge and also explaining many things that are now quite mysterious. So, the astrology of the Age of Aquarius imagines a time of peace and love, a long period of planetary repair and unity, an age of truth and justice, of harmony and understanding. It's rather like the Christian millennium imagined in the biblical stories of the second coming of Jesus Christ. On this account, the new age will be a time of planetary awakening, when our current trajectory towards destruction will be reversed and humanity will rediscover how to live in a state of grace. Astrology traditionally says that the sign of Aquarius has the primary theme of innovative humanitarian knowledge, while the corresponding theme for the sign of Pisces is understood as mystical, compassionate belief. So that means that if you look at the shift from the age of Pisces to the age of Aquarius, which is now happening, then the astrological symbolism associated with that is a shift from belief to knowledge as the guiding theme of social values. And this change quite directly matches the real change in the social evolution of the gradual replacement of religion by science as the dominant basis of social values. It's a model of time that should be seen as a way to integrate and reconcile reason and faith, not as something that suggests an abandonment of religion, but as a way to help religion to become scientific. Now, the Zodiac Age framework presents natural cycles that provide a framework to explain religious concepts. My view is that ideas in Christianity symbolize and reflect the ancient understanding of the Zodiac Age in a way that points toward and informs the current transition into a new age. So this claim offers a way to transform and renew Christian faith, putting faith onto scientific foundations of knowledge rather than belief, again pointing towards new paradigms. I've studied the underlying astronomy of this material in some depth, and looking at how the precession of the equinox relates to the framework of the whole solar system. I won't have time to go into that now, but the science around this is really quite interesting. And another key area is how this idea of a social evolution from belief to knowledge as our guiding principle corresponds to the deep underlying natural shifts in climate change, which indicate an upward phase of the orbital cycle, driving long-term natural climate patterns. But before returning to that question, I'd like to explain a bit more about the links between the Age of Aquarius and Christianity. So, if the Age of Aquarius concept has value as an evolutionary model to imagine future planetary repair, and seeing the story of the second coming of Jesus Christ as a parable for the dawn of Age of Aquarius, we can look toward a scientific way to explain the conventional Christian mythology of the end times, the Day of Judgment. A scientific approach to Zodiac Age can present a coherent replacement for the beliefs in sudden supernatural transformation, which we would have all seen in the literal apocalyptic thinking. Now, my view is the only way these traditional religious ideas can make sense is by finding a way to ground their symbolic spirituality in science, and that the astronomy of precession provides a powerful heuristic, a guiding framework to achieve this goal. Ancient knowledge of precession provided a religious framework to understand the orderly structure of time. And the New Testament used this objective framework of cosmic order and direction as the skeleton upon which the story of Jesus Christ was imagined and fleshed out. So, looking at the astronomy that can help us to link this material to biblical analysis, we've seen that Zodiac Ages are the slow cosmic clock of history. So this diagram that I've got here is from the astronomy program Skygazer 4.5, and I'll just take you on a whirlwind tour through 7,000 years of history. And here we see October the 23rd, 4004 BC, which I believe Bishop Ussher suggested was the date of the creation of the universe. But I've just chosen that with some irony to say this is the position of the equinox at that time, 6,000 years ago. We see the path of the sun and the equator. We see the Milky Way moving diagonally in between the constellations of Gemini and Taurus. Then moving forward 1,000 years, we see that this X point, the equinox point, has shifted towards into Taurus, and then continuing. Oh, I've got, what's happened there? Okay, now we'll just go forward. 3000 BC, yeah, shifted into Taurus, close to the Pleiades, the Hyades. Then next to 2000 BC, we see we've reached the end of the age of Taurus and the start of the age of Aries. Then from 2000 BC to 1000 BC, we see in the middle of the age of Aries, and then at the BC AD turning point, we'll just stop and consider that point. Now, the year 21 AD, you'll see that there's a line of stars which is perpendicular to the path of the sun, which is known as the first fish of Pisces. And So the precise moment of the shift of the equinox from the constellation of Aries into the constellation of Pisces, there are many ways of interpreting it, but my view is that the way the ancients understood it and predicted it for centuries before it happened, just through their basic astronomical knowledge, that when the equinox moved across this first fish, that they understood that as the start of a new age. Now, continuing to 1000 AD through the age of Pisces, the equinox point moves through the constellation of Pisces, and then we get back to the position today in this year, and then finally in the middle of the age of Aquarius in 3000 AD, which is our next one. So I'd just like to go back to this point when the equinox crossed into the sign of Pisces, and so just forward and forward one more. Now, what we see here, I'm just going to explain one of these forensic clues about this, my hypothesis that the ancients used this precession knowledge as a basis for Christian ideas, and that's the Christian symbol of the Chi-Rho cross as a major clue to astronomical influence on Christian origins. So this moment created an imaginary shape in the sky that's the same as the Chi-Rho cross and with the same symbolism. The Chi, or the X, is created by the intersection of the path of the sun and the equator, and the rho in the Chi-Rho cross, like the P, is created by the perpendicular line of stars that form the first fish of Pisces. Now, for the ancient precession theology, as I'm trying to reconstruct it, this moment marked an imagined celestial harmony between the stars and the seasons, the incarnation of Jesus Christ. It was a turning point of time connecting heaven and earth, as above, so below, representing the incarnation of divine reason in Jesus as the Son of God. The physical observation marks the transition from the Zodiac Age of Aries to the Age of Pisces, from one great year of precession to the next. The Alpha and Omega symbols that you can see here in the traditional Chi-Rho cross reinforce this meaning of Christ as a turning point, as the first and last. So the last of the Age of Aries, the first of the Age of Pisces. It was an event that the seers could foretell for centuries beforehand through relatively simple visual astronomy. And in my view, it provides quite an elegant explanation of the prophecies of the advent and timing of Christ. On this analysis, the gospel story of Jesus of Nazareth emerged from much older religious observation of precession as the defining cosmic structure of history. Jesus was imagined from long before his incarnation, personifying the sun as the founder or avatar of the Zodiac Age of Pisces, which is the period now coming to an end. Then on our next slide, we see here Emperor Constantine in 312 AD with his famous vision of the cross in the sky just before the Battle of the Milvian Bridge, which produced the imperial symbol known as the labarum, incorporating the Christian Chi-Rho cross. Emperor Constantine used this alleged miraculous vision to identify Christianity as a suitable story to bring the empire together, establishing Christendom with a political ideology that was to dominate the world for the next 1,000 years and more. If the Chi-Rho cross was actually based on observation of the precession of the equinox, it appears that the church in the time of Constantine must have still held this astronomical knowledge, but for some reason, they decided to keep it a secret. And perhaps they saw it as too complex and confusing for public knowledge. They preferred the literal dogma of the Gospels. But this Chi-Rho symbol, together with the ichthys Christian fish, based on the imagery of Pisces, made Christianity the definitive religion of the New Age. And it helps to explain how Jung saw Christ as the avatar of the age of Pisces. Observation of the stars provided the template for ancient philosophy and religion, with the visible heavens as the symbol of orderly eternal perfection. A notable example comes from Plato, 400 years before Christ. He recognised this moving X in the sky, marked by the equinox, in his philosophical dialogue called the Timaeus, and he used it to describe time as what he called the moving image of eternity. Plato accorded very high significance to this observation. He said that this X in the sky was the basis of his cosmology of the world soul. He said it was the basis of the fundamental concepts in logic of identity and difference. Now, he didn't present an accurate description of precession in the Timaeus, but it's still entirely possible that such accurate knowledge did exist long before Plato's time and was only known in distorted form in his academy, or that there was a deliberate concealment of the secret knowledge from the public. My reading indicates that observation of precession was of major interest to the writers of the New Testament, although the records of this interest were couched in deliberately concealed language, which indicates the existence of strong political opposition to making it public. I'd like to explore some of the numerous examples of this hidden astronomy in the Bible. It's quite a remarkable detective story that provides an important contribution to understanding the meaning of the Age of Aquarius today. Now, as I mentioned, Josephus said that Passover happened with the sun in Aries, and that had certainly been true for the preceding 2,000 years, but due to precession, it was no longer true at the time of Christ. In the year 5 BC, as Jewish people came to Jerusalem from all around Israel to celebrate the Passover feast, they saw a very unusual sight in the heavens. The Jewish lunar calendar sets the date of Passover near the first full moon after the spring equinox, so quite like Easter for Christianity. In 5 BC, Passover, and let's move forward to and one more. In 5 BC, Passover coincided with a blood moon, a total lunar eclipse, quite like the one Hipparchus had seen a century before. But the disconcerting thing revealed by both of these eclipses was that the heavens had shifted from the stellar axis that had held since before the time of Moses. When the Passover sun was in Aries, the full moon had to be in the opposite constellation, which is Libra. But everyone in Jerusalem on this night of Passover could see that the full moon was not in Libra, and the exact spot of the full moon was shown by the time it went blood red. You can tell that it's directly lined up. It was in the next star group, Virgo, at a point that we can call at the foot of the woman. That meant the sun was not in its traditional Passover location of Aries, but had precessed into the constellation of Pisces. And you can see this equinox axis. A new age was beginning. The Roman world was moving into what we now call the Common Era, uniting previously separate nations. Christianity would come to celebrate this moment as the turning point of time, marking the incarnation of Jesus Christ. And the underlying basis for this belief and for our BC AD calendar dating system was this visible movement of the stellar point where the natural year begins. The reason I mention this observation of this lunar eclipse is its striking similarity to the text from Revelation 12. Verse 1 says, "A great sign appeared in heaven, a woman with the moon under her feet." This cryptic image exactly matches this great sign that appeared in heaven at Passover in 5 BC, when the full moon at the foot of Virgo marked the dawning of a new age, with the equinoxes shifting to the Virgo-Pisces axis. Virgo and Pisces also symbolise the loaves and fishes. The brightest star in Virgo is Spica, which comes from the loaf of the spike of wheat. It's another biblical theme that directly encodes this precession cosmology as a symbol of the creation of universal abundance through harmony with the cosmos. This astronomical interpretation of these texts may appear to be entirely new, but its simplicity, its coherence suggests it may in fact be really very old and was somehow lost. It points to an accurate cosmology behind the New Testament, in which Jesus Christ was imagined as the avatar of the Zodiac Age of Pisces and also of the Zodiac Age of Aquarius in the Second Coming. For Christian theology, my view is that the Zodiac Age model can put biblical cosmology onto a scientific basis, showing that many biblical images, like this mysterious woman in heaven, directly and simply encode knowledge of precession. This observation has major implications for core ethical messages in the Bible. It's the scientific framework of precession provides a foundation for a systematic theology, placing Christian mythology within the empirical structure of visual astronomy to describe the complex order of human existence as a basis to build a vision of our common future, grounded in the wisdom of the past. My hypothesis is that knowledge of precession provided the real original basis of Christian theology, with the story of Christ designed to directly reflect the grand order seen in the heavens, to reflect this order on earth, viewing the glory of the starry firmament as the primary manifestation of the power and presence of God, as St. Paul suggests in Romans 1:20. However, this astronomical foundation was systematically suppressed, ignored, forgotten, and denied by the Church due to its perceived incompatibility with Orthodox literal belief. The Imperial Church required simple doctrines, and it declared an anathema against any so-called heresy. Just double check. Sorry, just give me a sec. No, it's not turned on there. Pardon that brief interlude. So the Imperial Church required simple doctrines that everyone could understand. It declared anathema against so-called heresies that made the faith too complex and confusing for the ignorant masses. The origins of Christianity thereby became lost to view. It's like scaffolding that you remove once a building is complete. This theological framework of cosmic symbolism in the Bible supports my view that the construction of a new vision for the Age of Aquarius should become the central organising idea for a transformed and contemporary Christian faith, looking to reform Christianity to make it fully compatible with scientific knowledge. Now, another example of this mysterious concealment of precession in the Bible comes again from the book of Revelation, with the infamous first beast of the apocalypse. And we'll move forward to the next slide. You see here the North Celestial Pole, where Polaris is the northern pole star. It's generally regarded as an unchanging feature of the heavens, never moving from its position at the North Celestial Pole. At least that's how it seems to each generation in modern times. Polaris is the bright star at the tail of the Little Bear, Ursa Minor, and it's popularly known as the Little Dipper. Sailors have used it for centuries to find north, but several thousand years ago, when the ideas in the Bible were being developed, Polaris was a long way from the pole, which was then in the constellation of Draco, shown on the next slide, near the bright star of Thuban. And I'm sorry, I've changed the frame of reference. This frame of reference is the North Ecliptic Pole, which is the pole of the sun. The celestial pole is the pole of the Earth, which is slightly complex astronomy. But anyway, we're talking about the movement of the North Celestial Pole. And the Polaris has moved its position in the sky to become the pole star as a result of the same slow wobble of the Earth's axis that caused the equinox points to precess around the stars of the zodiac. One of the strangest stories, as I mentioned, is in Revelation 13, where the dragon gave his power, his seat, and his authority to the leopard bear lion. This weird image of the beast of the apocalypse is quite hallucinatory, but observation of these stars near the pole readily show a probable real meaning. The power and seat and authority of the visible heavens traditionally rests at the North Celestial Pole, which is the fixed point around which the whole sky revolves every night. There are numerous myths that liken the celestial pole to the throne of God. Before 2000 BC, the pole was in Draco the dragon, and since then, the pole has slowly shifted into the constellation of the bear, right next to the constellation of Leo the lion, and others with names that are based on the leopard. So the authors of the Revelation could see that this cosmic movement of the pole against the stars reflected the big historical story of deep time as the encompassing measure of history. For the dragon to give his power, seat, and authority to the leopard bear lion, therefore reads as a direct allegory for this observation of cosmic order, the precession of the pole. For the general public, the authors packaged this observation into the supernatural myth that we can read in the Bible. But for the ancient initiates, the public story was a code for accurate long-term observation of the orderly movement of the heavens. This interpretation reflects the widespread ancient practice of using public stories to present a simplified symbolic version of concealed knowledge, while the real story was retained in secret shared oral memory by community elders, rather not in writing. This interpretation provides intriguing questions as to why the authors might have found the need to conceal their real meaning, and why this mode of interpretation was so comprehensively lost to public view. The answer may be that Orthodox religion saw this stellar symbolism as detracting from its stories of the transcendental dignity of God. The result of this repressive culture was that such symbols could only be conveyed in concealed form, making them highly vulnerable to complete suppression of their real meaning. Now, equally simple analysis of star symbolism and the cosmology of precession applies to biblical language about the holy city, the tree of life, the river of life, the cleansing of the temple by Christ, the end of the age, the first and the last, the upper room, the second coming, the lamb and fish, symbols for Christ, the king of ages, the wheat and tares, and the miracle of the loaves and fishes, among others. Such extensive usage, with its match to an entirely consistent and elegant natural meaning, cannot be simply dismissed as imagination or coincidence. The real puzzle is the scale and success of the psychological and political repression that were required to conceal this material, with its indication of the degraded state of human consciousness and our propensity to believe in myths. The Gospel story of the Last Supper is a key precession parable for the Age of Aquarius. The upper room where Jesus ate his final meal is a symbol for the eternal glory and power of God, manifest in the visible starry heavens of the night sky. Jesus tells his disciples in the Gospels of Mark and Luke that a man carrying a water jug will show their way to the upper room. Reading this story as an allegory for the Age of Aquarius, the man with the jug symbolises the sign of the water bearer. And here we see the, we'll move forward to the next one. We might come back to this one. So the man with the jug symbolises the sign of the water bearer. My reading sees this as an expectation that the stellar basis of biblical symbolism would remain concealed until the end of the Age of Pisces and the dawn of the Age of Aquarius. This appears to indicate the ancient authors believed that the public consciousness of their day was too ignorant, too degraded, too supernatural to engage this high stellar wisdom of precession. This stellar code in the Last Supper supports that the idea that the Gospels present Jesus as an allegory for the sun, with the 12 disciples as allegory for the 12 lunar months and the signs of the zodiac. As the light of the world, in Gospel of John, Jesus shone as brightly as the sun. The radiant image of Christ as a personification of the sun coheres perfectly with the precession hypothesis, since it's the position of the sun that defines the Zodiac Ages. Now, this astral model of the upper room, just going back to the previous slide, please, it's not a fanciful speculation. And in fact, as you might recall, I've argued it was supported by one of the greatest geniuses, Leonardo da Vinci, as I explained in my address last year here. There's a remarkable instance of Pisces Christ allegory hidden in plain sight in Leonardo's Last Supper, with Jesus directly modelled on the constellation of Pisces, reflecting his symbolic role as avatar of the Zodiac Age of Pisces. And similarly, the 12 apostles are directly modelled in order from right to left on the stars of the zodiac. The postures of each apostle are the same shapes as the main stars of the actual zodiac constellations, in the same order as in the sky, from Aries to Pisces. This reflects Leonardo's core interest in accurate depiction of nature, artfully concealed to respect religious prejudice. Now, with this hypothesis that observation of precession was central to Christian origins, it structures the formation of core Christian ideas by grounding the story of how God orders the cosmos. The literal gospel story directly reflects this archetypal symbolism of Jesus as a solar deity. It suggests that a secret wisdom school was responsible for the ideas in the New Testament as a way to put cosmic ideas of glory and order into a human setting. This community could have been the therapeutes of the Lake Mariotis Monastery near Alexandria in Egypt, and influenced strongly by Buddhism. The implication of the precession parables, such as the man with the water jug, is that the original authors developed a sophisticated vision of the shape of world history, in which the Christian message would be widely spread in distorted form through the 2 millennia of the Age of Pisces, and would then finally be properly understood as a program for planetary transformation, opening the Age of Aquarius as a time of planetary repair and restoration, imagined as the Sabbath millennium of peace. And the conventional biblical understanding of history offers quite an intriguing comparison here. So Bible texts state that 1,000 years are like a day for God. And the early Christian writers read this to imply a 7,000-year theory of history from about 4000 BC to 3000 AD, with 6,000 years of fall, followed by 1,000 years of repair, modelled on the 7 days of creation described in Genesis, where God works for 6 days and then rests for a day. This day millennium theory supports the belief that the second coming of Christ would occur at the beginning of the current millennium, starting the 7th millennium of history. So the Genesis idea of the 7th day as a Sabbath day of rest therefore coheres with the New Age idea of the Age of Aquarius as a time of planetary peace and repair. Popular stories in the Christian Gospels aimed to create the impression that the events they describe literally occurred. But modern research is showing that the authors wrote these stories as moral parables, as historical fiction, drawing loosely from history and myth. The real primary meaning of all the stories in the Bible, including the life of Jesus, is found in how they symbolize real natural observations in a mythological framework. Any match to actual events is entirely secondary, even irrelevant to the high religious purpose of enabling an integrated vision of reality. In fact, I would suggest that the dogmatic belief that the gospel stories are literally true is actually quite deeply corrupt, reflecting this long subordination of spiritual wisdom beneath the political stability agenda of the Roman Empire and its successors in Christendom. Getting behind the surface appearance to find the concealed truth is a problem that the authors of the Gospels approached through the philosophy of Plato, who recognised that popular beliefs can often serve as a cover for hidden knowledge. Plato tells the story in the Republic of how philosopher kings could construct a simplified moral mythology for mass consumption. Plato used as his example of such a popular political story a myth based on the historical belief in descent from a golden age of peace and abundance to an iron age of war and scarcity. Plato's ideas about constructing a myth of the golden age proved highly influential for Christianity in ways that have not really been recognised. Now, the intellectual scaffolding provided by the cosmic story of precession of the equinox seems to have enabled the construction of the Christ story. This building framework from the stars was used to imagine the timing and nature of a coming new age from this highly distinctive observation of when the spring point would move across the line of stars to enter Pisces. And the problem was that this original scaffolding was demolished and discarded once the new myths were established, just as scaffolding platforms around a real building. Allowing the actual stellar template to be generally known would have undermined the propaganda objective of gospel truth and therefore had to be vigorously suppressed. I'd like to conclude with some information about precession and climate change. So, this... Oh, right, okay. Yeah. Okay. So, now, this model of time that I've presented is supported by the science of precession as a primary driver of natural climate change. Orbital patterns known as Milankovitch cycles show that precession was the main cause of the rise and fall of sea levels and the advance and retreat of glaciers over the last 3 million years, the Pleistocene. Precession combined with other orbital cycles to produce a regular cycle of planetary warming and cooling. And it's a cycle that quite intriguingly matches directly to the Indian mythology of the Yuga cycle between golden ages and iron ages every 24,000 years. On the Indian myth, we're now entering an ascending period, which again is a symbolism that directly corresponds to both the story of the Age of Aquarius and the Christian idea of planetary salvation. So to conclude, tonight I've explained how we can use the astronomy of precession of the equinox to construct a systematic understanding of the connection between our planet and the cosmos at a scale directly relevant to human history and ethics. Discussion of the coming new age of Aquarius provides a way to understand the forces of good and evil operating in our world as a way to marshal support for ideas aimed to enable long-term flourishing of humanity within our natural planetary environment through integration of science and spirituality, building upon the long heritage of wisdom contained within the diverse traditions of human culture. Thank you.
See what he's up to. Okay, we're back on. We're back on. We better stop.
We're back on. Okay.
All right. Well, welcome back. And we'll just. I know there's a lot to take in, some quite complex, perhaps even controversial material there. So I just encourage questions and comments. So over to you. Just a sec, what we'll do is I'll just arrange with our good audiovisual expert to find a microphone. Okay, so we do have a second microphone, which Robert will bring to you, which you can use so that your question is.
Now we'll ask people to speak up. This mic doesn't amplify for the room.
Robert, outstanding, unsurprisingly. Thank you so much. So I'm fascinated by your suggestion that we are going to merge religion with scientific knowledge. What is going to be the force which allows that to happen? Is it going to be human intervention, or is it going to be the force of Aquarius, or is it going to be godlike and completely beyond our comprehension and influence?
I see it as, I see religion as a construction of human culture, and so changes to religion are driven by underlying social and economic forces, and then people will emerge who articulate a message that aligns with those emerging. So really the overall social situation we face is one of globalization. That is, that the human community has finally become one. And it's a story which appears directly in the Bible in Matthew 24. He says that the end of the age will not come until this gospel of the kingdom has been preached to the whole inhabited earth. And my interpretation of that is not in any detailed sense, but just that everybody on the planet will have had the opportunity to have heard of Jesus Christ. And I think that that's the case now. Like even the most remote parts of the world, people know that there's a religion called Christianity. And so finally, the whole of humanity is together. And I think there was a similar sort of force in the ancient world, which was the Common Era. That is, that before the Greek and Roman invasions, people were able to maintain their national religion in isolation. But once they were part of an empire, they needed to have a new religion which spoke to that new cross-cultural identity. So we're now in a situation of globalization, and the key message in the gospel is that the salvation of the world depends on feeding the hungry and giving drink to the thirsty, and visiting sick people, visiting prisoners, welcoming strangers, giving clothes to the naked, and the seventh work of mercy is to treat the least of the world as though they were Jesus Christ. So that's the story of the Bible about the message of salvation, and it's one that's been really quite badly neglected within Christianity, and yet it's one that I think speaks to the sort of emerging forces of the need for global stability. Thank you. Now, who's next? Oh, hang on. Terry? Sorry, but just Terry, before you speak, were you going to ask a question? Okay, well, after Terry, thanks.
Thanks. Thanks very much. Robert, is that working or not?
Yes.
It is. One of the questions that you raised, more of a mystery, is that why did the church authorities in those early days seem to bury the connection of the gospel story with astrological issues? And it occurred to me from my reading of the early church was that there was quite a conflict between the hierarchical establishment in the first few centuries and Gnosticism. And the Gnostics held a few views. One of them that the relationship between God and the individual was something between God and the individual, whereas the hierarchical church felt that there needed to be an authoritative teaching that everyone should comply with. The Gnostics, however, were great supporters of these astrological connections that you spoke about. So in their fight against the Gnostics, who were the supreme heretics for the early fathers, they repressed anything that had a Gnostic flavour to them. And that would include any theories that might relate to the gospel story to other broader issues. So that's one possibility for why it was buried. And I might comment on that. And the other point that I wanted to make was that I see no conflict between ascribing to the theological views, astronomical views, and the possibility that Christ was also a historical figure. That both could be true. And my reading of the history is that it's certainly true that Christ was a historical figure.
Sure. Okay, I'll respond to both those questions. I've read quite a bit about Gnosticism, and there's you might know the story of the Gnostic Gospels, which was that in 1945 there was a cache of ancient documents which were found in a pottery jar in the desert in the south of Egypt. And initially the peasants who found these jars didn't know what they were. It turned out that they were a whole series of Gnostic texts which had been buried by the Nag Hammadi monastery in the 4th century, because the Roman legions were on their way to Nag Hammadi to find any heretical literature, which they'd already gone through the whole of the empire hunting for heretical literature, to burn it. And so everything that was in conflict with the the teaching was that if you present any idea which is in conflict with the orthodox gospel and the teachings of the church, then that's a capital crime. And so that was the situation for 1,000 years of Christendom. So this whole Gnostic tradition of heterodox, a range of different views, was really radically suppressed, and it was only at the very far fringe of the Roman Empire, at the very southern end of Egypt, one place where these documents survived. But when I read the Gnostic Gospels, I was quite keen to find some of this sort of material, and I was quite disappointed to see there wasn't really that much about this sort of zodiac astronomy. And whereas I see this zodiac astronomy as much more prominently within the Gospels itself, just concealed in encoded form. And so the question of the nature of Gnosticism as a movement, as a bunch of movements, is a very complex historical question. So the church fathers, who were known as the heresiologists, just studying heresy to root it out, they said one of the prime heresies was the belief in 12 ages. And so that's one of the ideas that I've presented here. So this whole framework was, I think, quite definitely heretical by the views of the church fathers. Now, my view is that a lot of the Gnostic material that survived from Valentinus and other later Gnostics from the 2nd and 3rd century, it doesn't necessarily reflect this material, that a lot of this material reflects oral traditions which were quite strictly transmitted from mouth to ear and were not written down, but that made them intensely vulnerable to destruction. And so it's only this sort of forensic reconstruction that can identify that this sort of teaching was behind the story. Now, on the question of the historical existence of Jesus Christ, that's becoming much more controversial. It's like most people, like certainly about 10 years ago, like I was a believer in the historical Jesus until about 10 years ago. And then a friend introduced me to a book, The Jesus Puzzle by Earl Doherty, which just goes through the evidence. And I think a couple of things that really disturbed me were, for example, Philo of Alexandria was a contemporary of Jesus. And if Jesus was real, and especially if he did things like the crucifixion as a major political event, then Philo would have noticed it and mentioned it. Now, we can get into all debates about Josephus and so on, but the absence of the historical Jesus from Philo, but even more importantly, from the epistles of Paul, that Paul never places Jesus in space or time. So there's this sense that Paul's Jesus is a cosmic Jesus, and it's an imaginary Jesus. And it's like the placing in Nazareth, in Bethlehem, even in Jerusalem, only came later with Mark. It's like the story started off as a skeleton, and then it was gradually enfleshed with stories that would enable the popular audience to resonate with it as a way of bringing people into this new institution, where I think that the Gnostics imagine, it's a bit like the story of the Sorcerer's Apprentice, that the apprentice imagined that he could control the magic broom, and it had a mind of its own and took control. And similarly, the Gnostics who put this zodiac cosmology into the Gospels, they thought that they could control the institution. But what they found was that Mark's Gospel story of Jesus of Nazareth was just so wildly popular that people emerged who said, this is all completely true, and anyone who says it's not is the Antichrist. And that was the line that got into John's letters in the Bible. So anybody who criticised the idea that Jesus came in the flesh is the Antichrist, according to the Bible. And so that became a really powerful way of suppressing any debate. And then if you had a written document which said, oh, maybe Jesus wasn't real, then possessing that document was a capital crime for 1,000 years. So it's quite likely that that any documentary evidence would not have survived. The only place we can look is for concealed evidence. So, Jeff.
Reading on this too, and there are plenty of instances where Trajan and Pliny and so forth have written about the historical Christ. But I must say that if you read the history of the reaction of the Jewish authorities at the time, they have there's the 18 benedictions. It's a famous Jewish prayer at the time. And when the conflict between the Christian community and the Jewish authorities that had survived the destruction of Jerusalem, they introduced one of the benedictions into the so-called benedictions, and it went something like this: cursed be the Nazarene and all who follow him. But it's pretty clear evidence that the Jewish authorities in the first century certainly believed that Jesus the Nazarene was a real person.
Yeah, look, I've read a lot of this material, and what is generally the case is that the references to Jesus are based on Christian testimony. So, for example, where Tacitus or Pliny talk about Christianity, then they are describing the existence of a movement of Christians. And of course, the Christian movement claimed that Jesus was real, so they took that on face value. But as far as, look, this is a massive question that you've raised, Terry, and I really welcome it as an interesting one. I've presented, I suppose, a hypothesis for how I think Jesus could have been invented. Now, what Jung says about this is that he feels that it's quite likely that because the prophecy of Jesus had been such a strong idea within the Jewish community, that it's quite likely that somebody arose who sought to channel that prophecy and imagine themselves as the Messiah. And this is something that we see today with the Jerusalem syndrome. And so there were many pretend messiahs, but the idea that Jesus was crucified under Pontius Pilate after proclaiming himself King of the Jews through his triumphal entry into Jerusalem as a seditious rebel, it's the sort of thing that if it was true, it would have appeared in history, but it simply doesn't. Until 2 generations later, it appears in the Gospel of Mark. And then every other mention of the Jesus of Nazareth story is completely derivative from the Gospel of Mark. So look, I'll close you down now, Terry, because
that would be really challenged heavily by lots of historians.
Thanks, Terry.
That's a huge subject, yes.
Okay, John and then Jeff.
What you talked about, the amalgamation or the intrusion of science and facts into religion as such is it's I would say it's a necessary thing, because so many young people now are turned away from the Orthodox religion. They're looking for something, and they're looking in all sorts of places which isn't very healthy, in order to get a sense of, what would you call it, of what? Yeah, that's right.
Or spiritual comfort.
And yes, that's right. Something to believe in, I guess. And we all strive towards that. How that is put together is an interesting question, because there is also a power structure there that's resisting that in the religion. Because there's always power associated with any religion or any belief. So, but I see that great necessity for young people who've been turned away from the church, which is a good socializing influence, if nothing else, and are looking for something, and they're not finding it at the moment.
Look, I think that's a really central point, John, and the way I view it is that by interpreting the Bible in an allegorical way and removing any sense of the miraculous from our understanding of the Bible, that it's possible to retain the moral and ethical meaning of the gospel story in a way that makes it compatible with modern secular understanding and modern secular values. And I see that as really quite essential. And the church is in a bad way. Like, I think primarily the sort of sexual predator problem of the church is exposed wide open to abuse. So it's just caused a collapse of trust. And so, and there's this view that we don't need religion, which I think is really quite unhealthy, because people really need to come together with a shared sense of meaning and identity. And so we need to find new ways of interpreting religious ideas that make sense for the world today. And that's really what I'm trying to help.
Well, I was just going to follow up on the early Christian angle in the time of the Jesus movement. The Hebrew world was in a great state of turmoil. The Romans had destroyed the temple, and there were many different strands of the Essenes, the Zealots, etc. It seems only two of them survived, but one became the Jesus movement, and the other one was the ongoing the Pharisees who became the rabbinical, that morphed into the rabbinical tradition. I was wondering whether, outside your looks at Christianity, whether the ongoing Jewish religion had any of this astrological beliefs that they might have been encoded in the Talmud and their other Kabbalah or their other ongoing things. Also, whether it might be a little stretch when you look at the Islamic tradition, whether they had any connection, the astrology that is looking at the astrology the same way that the early Christians seem to have encoded.
Well, Kabbalah and even tarot are esoteric traditions with a strongly, obviously Kabbalah was the Jewish esoteric tradition, and the concept of the tree of life appears in Kabbalah. Where I find this whole idea of cross-cultural syncretism in the origins of Christianity really interesting is in looking at the range of cultural inputs that flowed into the construction of Christianity. So I mentioned Greece and Plato. In the break, I was talking about the role of Indian mythology, and then I think that the astrology seems to have come more from Babylon. And so the Bible presents a very strong nod towards Babylon with the three kings at the birth of Christ in the nativity story. And so there's a whole symbolism in that story. I'm sorry, I can't really talk about Jewish and Muslim factors, but I will say that I believe that Buddhism had a massive influence. In fact, that monasticism as a movement was brought by Buddhists to the West. So Alexander the Great invaded India in the 4th century BC, establishing this connection. Then in the 3rd century, the Buddhist king Ashoka, Emperor of India, sent Buddhist missionaries to the West and to the rest of the world. They established the Buddhist monastery of Lake Mariotis in Alexandria. And we find that so much of the teachings that are called Q, the ethical teachings in the Bible, have a direct link to Buddhism. And so there's this sense that so much of the ethical tradition within the Gospels came out of Buddhism, but that's been so suppressed. It just raises another example of the nature of cultural imperialism, because the modern movement of classics insisted that the path of transmission of culture was from west to east, whereas if you look to the ancient sources, you find that the real path of transmission was from east to west, that in the east there are great ancient civilizations who viewed the Europeans as barbarians. But then the Europeans were able to turn that on its head by saying that they were the cultured, civilized ones, and it was the Easterners who were the barbarians. So
once the Westerners got gunpowder from the Chinese, it made a difference.
It made an awesome difference. So yeah, so I hope that's enough. Jeff? Yeah.
Other the encoding in the early Christian era, the church fathers were first couple of hundred years. What about later on? Was this an ongoing tradition through the papacy or the Cathars or other heretics? You could see in Christianity in the next 2,000 years?
Well, up until the Reformation, yes. So if you go to all of the cathedrals of Europe, they generally have very strong astrological motifs. So Chartres, Notre Dame, depictions of the 12 signs of the Zodiac. One of my favourites is Saint Denis in northern Paris, with a magnificent rose window of Jesus surrounded by the 12 disciples and the 12 signs of the Zodiac. So this association between the 1 to 12 relationship between the sun and the moon formed, I suppose, the archetypal foundation of the relationship between Jesus and the 12 disciples. And that flowed through into Christian iconography of the first millennium, but then I think more with the rise of Protestantism, there came to be more of a strong split between Christianity and astrology. But so, like, it's a movement that came and went. It's like in the early church, they were quite hostile to astrology for its pagan content. But then astrology sort of came back in with the Gothic cathedrals. Then it got got dumped again, and I think it's going to come back in again.
Would you like to make any comments or connection between the Age of Aquarius of the 60s and what you can say with the traditional declines?
Yes, definitely. So the idea of the counterculture and the hippie movement in the 1960s is where the general popular associations with the concept of the Age of Aquarius are found. And so it was this idea that a transformation of culture was possible. And so thinking about the whole idea of the generation gap in the 1960s, saw the younger generation as somehow open to these new ideas, while the older conservative generation was quite hostile. My feeling was that movement never really worked through the concept of the Age of Aquarius in a very coherent way, and so it lost any momentum, but it flowed through into the whole New Age movement, which is really quite a substantial. I was just in the research that I was doing for this talk, I looked at the Wikipedia page on the New Age movement, and it's quite remarkable what a wide influence New Age concepts have, and in the concept of being spiritual but not religious is part of the New Age. Just the rejection of institutional church and openness to some of these magical traditions. My attitude to magic is pretty complicated. I follow Jung in a lot of this, where he tries to maintain a scientific approach, but still sees experiences like synchronicity as real. And so I think that the 1960s provided an important starting point, but and then that movement went into something of an intellectual recess, but I think it'll come back.
So you'd see that there was indeed some kind of underground current of this astrological thought that surfaced in the Age of Aquarius movement?
Yes.
So there was a tradition that you would see moving in Christian thought underground.
Well, there's a big tradition of astrology as a movement is immensely popular, just in the terms of newspaper horoscopes, and just as people knowing their sun sign. So there's an interest in just natal astrology, often more as entertainment than as science. Yet it just illustrates that there's a popular sympathy for these sorts of ideas, but then there's a big challenge in putting these ideas into any sort of coherent and persuasive, rigorous form. Robert.
Yeah, thanks.
Thanks, Richard.
Like why Christianity must change or die and so forth, which we translate a lot of that. But it was widely popular in Canberra behind the walls and the overflowing with people having freedom and so forth. Sydney Anglicans wouldn't allow just visit any church in Sydney. I don't know what John said about astrology or what we're talking about tonight, but he certainly touched upon a lot of those things. Now, I'm not sure what effect these quite popular books have had in terms of getting into what you might call mainstream Christianity. Do you have any ideas about that?
Yeah, I came along to the Albert Hall that night and listened to John Spong speak, and I read a number of his books, but it's a long time ago that I read them, and my understanding is that he retains a belief in the historical Jesus, and that he doesn't really engage in this sort of positive view about New Age concepts. So he was, I think, looking to more along the line of books like Jesus Without Christianity, where there's a sense that the churches have just got it wrong. So that the churches, and it's especially with sort of major popular doctrines like the afterlife, heaven and hell, and the belief in miracles, that Spong was trying to present a version of Christianity that made sense from a modern scientific view without really going into any of this sort of more controversial type of speculation that I've presented. So the idea that Jesus didn't exist, I'll just give you a quick potted history of it. It was, it first came into public view at the time of the French Revolution, which was the first time it was legal to raise that, with French thinkers like Dupuy and others comparing Jesus to as a sun god. Then there was a whole range of 19th century authors who explored comparison between Jesus and other rising and dying gods. Then the most prominent disbeliever in the historical Jesus was V.I. Lenin, the Russian dictator. And I think he did a big disservice, because he put the idea of the non-existence of Jesus in the context of atheist communist revolution. So the League of the Militant Godless, that sort of attitude, which is really a very different sort of approach. I'm looking at quite a way of recovering the inner meaning of Christianity rather than attacking it. Because what's happened with the rejection of the existence of Jesus, it's been so associated with atheism that it's the idea that if we can prove that Jesus was fiction, then we can expect to see religion disappear. And I think that that's a profoundly misguided attitude, because I think that religion is just essential for human society and health. Shauna.
Thanks for your talk, Robbie. Look, you look at the constellations in the sky that you're looking at, and humans have said these are there are groups of stars in the sky, but we've said they're these particular animals or figures, and then we've said these particular figures have this sort of meaning, therefore Aquarius has this sort of meaning, Pisces has this sort of meaning. I can see that, yes, there is a movement of the equinox is and everything. I understand that, but to actually project onto that this age of Aquarius will mean a time of where we move from belief to knowledge. that just seems like fantasy to me. You know, there's no reality to that. That's just something, you know, it's like...
But it's actually true, because what we can see over the last 2,000 years is
But that's not connected to those constellations.
No,
If there's a change, there's no kind of connection. Those constellations haven't caused that change.
Well, it's not the constellations that cause the change. I used the example of a clock which is fast approaching 10 o'clock, and the number 12 behind the minute hand doesn't cause the fact that it's 12 o'clock any more than the distant stars cause there's a whole physics of astrology which actually makes sense, surprisingly enough, which you wouldn't know from the views of scientists who are really deeply ignorant about it. But the connection here, Shona, is more, there is a climate cycle which has been stable over the last 4 billion years, which has this roughly 20,000 year pattern of changes of light and dark. And so this idea of a climate year over that sort of period, which has the same sort of cyclic structure as the annual year, is a way to start to approach that. And in that framework, where we're now in, it's driven by the date when the Earth is closest to the Sun, which is called the perihelion. And this was a part of my talk I didn't have time to include. But the perihelion is each year is about 4th of January. And so it takes 20,000 years to go around the full cycle of the seasons. So there's a correlation between the idea of the perihelion date and the changes in culture, which then can be linked to this Age of Aquarius, but I'm not suggesting at all any causality from stars. And that's a sort of basic misunderstanding, which is really pervasive in relation to astrology. With the belief and knowledge idea, it's more just starting from the idea that that cultural evolution is shifting the world from a basis of social values in belief toward a basis of social values in knowledge.
But that has nothing to do with going from Pisces to Aquarius.
It's only a coincidence. So the thing is that astrology has traditionally said the theme of Pisces is belief and the theme of Aquarius is knowledge. And there's a coincidence between that and
So it's a coincidence that you're talking about,
well,
then?
At one level, it's a coincidence, but at another level, there's a causality, and the fact that there's a surface coincidence doesn't eliminate the possibility of causality. And when you place it into the context of the climate cycle, then you can start to see the dynamic structure of the causality, and then essentially the astrology functions as somewhat like a myth.
Yeah, I think it's a myth, and I don't think it helps looking at star signs and thinking they're reflecting kind of. I don't find it helpful. I don't understand it, obviously, the way you do, but you know, I don't see any reality to it. But you know, looking at constellations and thinking that moving through those constellations reflects kind of something that how we project onto those constellations. Anyway, I'm repeating myself. We project certain characteristics onto those constellations, and say
this is the issue. It's not at all about looking at constellations. It's about looking at the natural structure of the year. And this is where there are these cyclic patterns that divide the year into 2, 3, 4, 6, 12 parts, and each of those monthly parts has a distinct nature. So this is where you can start to develop the physics of the idea, and I think it's dangerous to take the superficial mythology as a reason to dismiss the hypothesis, because the hypothesis actually has got a scientific depth to it, which is not contradicted by this surface mythology.
For example, if you look at the way coral spawns on a certain day when of the full moon, over a very wide area, it's not just one coral's next to its neighbour having some influence, but over a huge area they come out on a certain day. We just don't understand how that could relate specifically to the moon.